friends, welcome back. I'm here today with Kyle Meintjes. I hope I said that right, over in South Africa. Kyle had a pretty long, hard journey with long COVID, about 2 years, and chronic fatigue symptoms. And although it was an incredibly trying journey, he also found it a really transformative process as well. And he's here today because he wants to share, some of his insights from his recovery, because thankfully he was able to eventually make a full recovery and to help to continue to shed some light on this topic and, change our ideas around recovery with conditions like long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome. And stick around to the end because he's going to dive into some of the things that helped him, or some of the things that kept him back and kept him stuck, how he dealt with his health crashes, and eventually the things that allowed him to finally get past this. So Kyle, it's so wonderful to meet you, and I really appreciate you doing this today.
Oh, thank you. It's awesome to be here, Raelan. It's crazy. I remember like a year ago when I first came across your channel and looking at all the recovery stories, it was like a really important part of the journey for me. It's so awesome to be here doing the same thing now myself.
That's amazing. Take us back. Tell us a bit about what your health journey has been like.
Yeah, cool. So, it's been about 2 years, just over now, because I've been recovered for a while now. But it probably started I got COVID in the end of 2020, so like October 2020. And then the long COVID symptoms, they weren't that extreme at first. It was just like some lingering symptoms after having like COVID. But then over the next few months, as I started to, because the symptoms didn't go away, and as I started to focus more and more on the symptoms and trying to fix it, because it was now maybe 3 months after I'd gotten COVID, and it was like kind of scary, like what's going on here, So then I started to focus more and okay, I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to try to fix this. And from there, things got progressively worse. And it's funny, looking back now, I can see that it was like the more seriously I tried to take it, the more serious the symptoms got. But at the same time, I feel that was the only way it could play out, because I could only recover after I'd really hit rock bottom. So for like a year after COVID, things progressively went downhill until I was, living at home. I wasn't exercising anymore. I wasn't studying anymore. I wasn't working anymore. So my life became pretty small. And then from there, that was a really challenging time. So that was like maybe 1 year in. And then it kind of hit rock bottom. And then from there, I came across your channel. Like, listening to people's recovery stories really was a pivotal moment for me. It was like changing my beliefs, because I'd really started to believe that recovery wasn't possible for me, especially the more I read about like chronic fatigue syndrome and ME, and a lot of the stories online, and my symptoms matched up a lot with the chronic fatigue syndrome. It was like my beliefs weren't strong that I was going to recover. And then watching your stuff and other people's recovery stories and picking up tidbits from there and a bunch of other things as well. The next year, I kind of started recovering. And then maybe the end of 2022, I was fully recovered. So that's just a brief summary of the story.
I'm very curious. One of the things I love about having this opportunity to talk to people that live all over the world is, where you are in South Africa, what was the general mindset or approach to treatment, or how did the medical community respond to things like long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was first started, worrying about my symptoms, so let's say I had COVID, and then 3-4 weeks passed and I was still struggling with symptoms. And in South Africa at the time, it was still fairly new, end of 2020, I didn't know many people that had COVID. So it was like, it was unknown, I wasn't sure what to expect. And I was young and healthy. So I went to like one of my local doctors, and it was because it was maybe a month after COVID. It was just like, we don't really know, like how long COVID symptoms last for. There could just be some like post-viral fatigue, because initially it was like headaches and fatigue. And I think that was mostly just like an overall like weakness and tiredness still from the virus, like not feeling 100%. So yeah, like I went to my local doctor a couple of times over those few months, because it was like, okay, you know, and as the months passed, it was like, okay, now it's been like 2 months, now it's been 3 months, like this is getting like weird. And then for a while, I didn't really see any doctors because, you know, I just tried to carry on with my life. So, I just, you know, was working, exercising, studying. So I was quite busy. And then the busier I got, you know, the worse things got over a period. So then I went to go see some doctors again because I really wanted to figure this out. I mean, the doctor, to be honest, was really, it felt like a good interaction. I've read a lot of other people's experiences with doctors and, you know, not feeling validated and, you know, being dismissed and that kind of thing. That wasn't my experience. So the doctor was really understanding, but at the same time, there wasn't much she could do to help. You know, so we did a bunch of tests, like any tests we could think of. So like a whole bunch of different blood tests and heart scans and all of those kind of basic things first to see if we could pick anything up. And then there wasn't. So then the recommendation was just, you know, try to manage this with rest, try to avoid pushing too hard. I think it was from that moment that I stopped exercising because I'd said to the doctor that, you know, every time I exercise, I get this post-exertional malaise, these symptoms, these flu-like symptoms after exercising. So then we decided, okay, you know, try 1 month no exercise, try to avoid anything that feels like it's inducing symptoms, take some time off university. So yeah, that was probably my initial experience with the doctors. And from there, I kind of started to deal with things on my own because there wasn't much more left. You know, it was kind of clear that they weren't able to help me.
What was that like? What were you thinking? I'm just trying to picture you're this young, otherwise healthy person, and then you got to a place where you said you started to think that you might never recover. Like, where was your head at in all of this?
It's funny. It was like there was different stages where I felt like I had different attitude towards the whole thing. So initially, it got really difficult. Like the more scared I got, I suppose. So like after those last few doctor's visits, when they like, because it was always like, okay, maybe these next scans will bring something up. And then we said, you're not going to exercise anymore. I dropped out of university. I moved home with my parents. It was like, the thoughts at that time were kind of like what's going on? Like it felt like my life was falling apart, to be honest. It was just like thinking back to a year ago. It was like, I remember I was like exercising, you know, like super busy. I was a really busy guy with like doing a lot of things. And I was just comparing this in my mind all the time. Like, this is so weird. Like my life has changed so much. And it's like, what do I do about it? Like there was just this, like there didn't seem to be a path forward. And that kind of got progressively worse. So, but again, there were stages. So like initially it was really scary. And then I read some books like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning about like people going through like really difficult, you know, like really intense suffering and then finding meaning from it and that kind of stuff. So that kind of gave me like a different perspective on it. Like, okay, this is a good thing. But then like 6 months later when I was still not recovered and symptoms were getting worse and worse, and now it was like a year on, and I kept on, in my mind, it kept on going like, it's a year on and we're worse than we were before. Like that was one of the things that was like keeping me stuck. I think it was like that thought was, it was this like comparison of, it was this keeping track of time, like, 12 months, 13 months, 14 months, and I'm worse. So how am I going to get better if I keep on getting worse? You know, so that was around when I hit rock bottom. Was like, it was, and I tried a bunch of different things. Like I started working with a physio, and that gave me some hope because she had some like pacing strategies and activity scheduling. So that was like, okay, this is going to work. And then it didn't work. And then that was like a big crash. Like that little bit of hope when it went, that was when it was like, I don't know if I'm going to recover, you know?
I just remember it being very shocking. It took me a long time to get past the shock of it. It kind of felt like being kidnapped from my life, like just plucked out of this really active, busy, normal kind of life. And then just all of a sudden everything was gone. And it was so traumatic. And I remember feeling like, kind of like the world kept turning, and it's very probably selfish, or I don't know what it is, but it felt like such a crazy thing was happening and just everything else was going on as normal. And I was just trapped in my body and stolen from my life. And it was a really hard thing that's why I always, I want to hear about how people process that, because I think it's an important part, because I think a lot of us really struggle with that.
No, just what you were saying about like the world moving on. I remember like at certain times, watching everybody carry on with their lives, like friends, family, like just moving on. That was really difficult. It was like, it just felt so unfair as well. It's like, I'm young. I thought I was healthy. It's like, why is this happening? But as this progressed, it's like looking back now, I'm really grateful for the whole experience. But, for a long time, it was hell.
Yeah, I think it takes a while to get to that gratitude place. And like you said, you can only be there for so long when it keeps going on and if it keeps getting worse. And I remember I used to watch Oprah all the time. And I remember her one time saying, she's like, some days I get up and I just say, Lord, please don't teach me anything today. Like the growth is good, but like, give me a break. I'm glad you got to that place now. It is incredible how you can go through such hell and come to a place of any kind of gratitude for it. It does kind of speak to the amount that you take away from it. So when you were working on your recovery, what types of things did you explore? What didn't work? What things did you find that did start to work?
Yeah. So I'll start with the things that didn't work, because that's what I was working with first, is like specifically I focused a lot on diet and pacing, because that was the only two things that I could really find online. When I decided, I was left that I have to figure this out myself. So I was, spending a lot of time on forums and reading other people's experiences. And I've said before, it was kind of the blind leading the blind, because the problem was most of the people on the forums were still stuck themselves, but some people would say this was helping them. Yeah, so I was mostly looking for information online on the forums, what other people were sharing was working for them. And what I was seeing a lot in the long COVID forums was diet. So a lot of people talking about, specifically for the long COVID, there was a big focus on like histamine and a low histamine diet. So that's what I was seeing everywhere. So I tried that. And that's a really restrictive diet. It's like if I look at the diets I had before I tried that, it was a pretty balanced diet. I ate relatively healthy, but now like 60-70% of the foods that I usually ate were cut out. But I committed to this because I'd seen other people saying it helped them, and I didn't know what else to do. I was like, I've got to try this. But it actually became like a sticking point for me, because so I tried it. I was like, I'll try it for a month and see. Like, I can't just do it for a week. I have to do it for a month to see if there's any, results or anything. And then what happened is after a month, this fear had kind of developed around those foods that had been like, because I'd read everybody else getting flare-ups from all of these high histamine foods, and saying like what a bad reaction they had to it. So these beliefs started to form in me that, these foods are like a threat. And if I consume them, I'm most likely going to get a reaction. So the diet didn't actually help. Like after 1 month, 2 months on the diet, I didn't feel any better. But now I'd also like, when I tried some of these foods, I was getting a reaction to them as well. So it was like, it definitely didn't help. And it became a really, stressful situation, the whole food thing, like when meal times and all of that, I didn't know what to eat anymore. It was like such a focus on, I have to, because then I started looking at other diets, but now I still wanted to keep this low histamine diet as well. So it was like, there was almost nothing left to eat in the end. So it was adding so much stress to my life. It wasn't improving, but it just created this fear of like, I can't eat that. So that's one thing for me that didn't help, was diet. And then also like, pacing and, activity scheduling didn't work for me. So it was also one of the things I tried early on, because looking at chronic fatigue syndrome, forums and what people experienced, like how they were managing their illnesses, everybody spoke of pacing. So I took that quite seriously, and I was like, okay, I have to avoid anything that, causes a flare up or causes a crash, because that's going to lead me to like a severe case where I'm going to be bedbound. So it was, again, this fear of like anything that induces symptoms. But what happened was like, I wasn't able to do it. So the belief formed in my mind that like I'm only going to recover when I nail this pacing 100%. Like I have to be perfect. Like I kept on having these crashes where I'd do something and then I wouldn't rest for like, I would rest for half an hour afterwards as opposed to 2 hours based on the activity schedule I'd come up with. And then I would crash and then it would be like, yeah, I've got to get this right. But it was impossible. It was only after like the 10th crash where I was like, I can't do this. Like it's not going to work, you know? Yeah. So those are two things that didn't work for me.
This whole thing, so many people I talk to, it's like a exercise in fear where you just slowly become afraid of virtually everything in the world, every activity, all of your food. And I interviewed someone recently, a practitioner who treats people, and they were using some of the same strategies that they do when working with people to help them overcome phobias, because much of what we become, it's that same kind of reaction. It's interesting how we start to think it's the food or the pacing that's making us sick, but it's really just all the stress around it and the trauma of what's going to happen if I eat the wrong thing or I don't follow my pacing schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It was really, the fear was like what was causing all the symptoms for me, but it was like unconscious, you know. There was just, you go look online, what do? You read all these stories, it induces this fear in you, and then it just plays out like that. Until I was like, I've got to try something else because this isn't working, when I like eventually hit rock bottom.
All right. So one of the things that we really wanted to dive into today was how you deal with crashes and flare-ups. So can you tell us or how you did a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I think this is a really important point because it was like the ideas that about crashes that again were keeping me stuck. So like when I wasn't recovering, every crash was like another moment of like, I'm never going to recover. It was like a big like bursting of the bubble of hope, you know. It was like, and we crashed again. But looking back, it wasn't actually like that. That's why I like to, looking back now, I think flare-up's a better word, because it wasn't a crash like you're making progress and then boom, you crashed like back down to step one. It was like, especially when I started more on the recovery path, like challenging myself, trying to do the things that were like my body had perceived as these threats, and the only way to fix that was to introduce these things again, and try to like recondition my body's response to it. So there were going to be flare-ups in this process. You know, when I first tried to introduce exercise again, there was going to be, it's like stepping out of that safe zone, that really small safe zone that had developed. And at first it was always like, I tried something and then there's a massive crash and it was like, I can't do this, you know, it's not going to work. But it's a natural part of the recovery process where it was like, doing this, there's going to be a flare up, and then you keep trying and working with like noticing your reactions in the moment. So it was like the next time I tried it again, and I could see like the thoughts and the fears coming up, and if I could just notice it and be like, oh, look, that's there. Like, that's okay. That can be there. And then maybe there's still a flare up with symptoms. Again, it was really difficult at first. Like, it took me a long time to get to the place where I could work with this, but it's a part of the process, you know? So yeah, I remember when crashes were like such a big deal, but looking back now, it was just a part of the recovery process. It's like, I don't know, maybe for some people it is, but for me, it wasn't just like, okay, I understand that this is all like my body's like perceptions of these things as threats. It's not the actual things themselves. So it's like, oh, okay, I can go exercise. I go exercise and I'd have a big crash. So it took time to like retrain my nervous system. So yeah, that was a bit of my experience with crashes and flare-ups.
That's such a good point too. When you think even about the word crash, like just hearing that word makes me feel stressed. You know, how hopeless and stressed do you feel when you're like, I'm in a crash versus I'm in a flare-up? And you know, I had a very similar experience with my recovery. And when I first started talking about it, I was a bit nervous. I did a video about it when I first started this channel, probably very cringeworthy, but I was saying in it, I didn't understand the nervous system component and I didn't understand what I was doing at the time. But I was saying that my experience was, you know, once I finally recovered, I had to accept that I had to feel worse to feel better. Like I had to keep doing new things in teeny tiny little amounts, you know, upping it, you know, 1 more minute of movement or exercise, like doing a little bit more. And I would get those flare ups. And that's when I finally accepted that in my recovery. I'm like, this is this is the journey. I'm going to push a little bit. I'm going to feel a little bit worse, but then I'm going to come back a little bit stronger than I was before that. And then again and again and again. And then you could, when those flare-ups happen, be at peace with them. And that seemed to be so pivotal for me, because then the stress was removed from the equation. And then even though I didn't realize it, it was, helping to, retrain my nervous system, or however you want to word it, or just work with my nervous system and have it in a good state. So yeah, I think that's such an important thing that you brought up.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you said there, of like, you had to, I can't remember quite how you said it, but you had to feel worse to get better. And for me, it was like, I had to get willing to be uncomfortable. And that was really when things started changing for me as well. So if I look at the first half of my experience with this, it was like trying to distract myself from what was going on in the body. It was like, say there would be a flare up from something, and then how I would respond to that would be, it's so uncomfortable. I would, try and listen to a podcast or read a book or something, which would make it worse. And then the beliefs would come on like, oh, reading a book gives me symptoms, when it was more just like this progressive worsening of the discomfort the more I ran away from it, right? I can look at this all now and see how it was like that. But at the time it was labeled completely differently. It was like, oh yeah, reading gives me symptoms. This gives me symptoms. This gives me symptoms. So it was the same thing. It was like, the more I could sit with the symptoms and the sensations in the body, the more I could welcome it, the body's response died down. And that's when like the recovery really started happening.
Yeah, I don't know if you know of Miguel Batista, but I interviewed him a couple times on the channel, and he explained it in a way that I thought was really well. He said, think of when you're healthy and you go to the gym and then you're sore the next day or the next 2 days. You don't stress out. You're not like, what's happening? My muscles hurt. My body's broken. It's just, okay, this is a normal response to what I'm doing. So it's training yourself to have that kind of a response to these flare-ups and these symptoms as you're working on your recovery. Like, it's not, you're on the right path.
No, absolutely. Because it's like you just said, with it's literally the perception and the labels around it. So it's like, we go to the gym and we feel those sensations afterwards, and it could be the exact same sensations, but it's because of what the story we're telling about it. So it's like, I went to the gym, this is good, this is fine. And it's now like, I've got a chronic illness and I read a book and I've got these symptoms, this is bad. It's all just like it's looking at the story we're telling about it, I suppose. And something else I want to mention about the whole crashes and flare-ups is what really worked for me was realizing that it was all about resistance. So, like when I would notice the symptoms, or what started happening is when I learned about like retraining the nervous system, then the resistance shifted from the symptoms to the thoughts about the symptoms. So like the first shift was, okay, the symptoms can be here, but then I would notice the thoughts being like, ooh, this is uncomfortable. And then be like, oh, that's a bad thought, that mustn't be here. And then that would cause the same kind of stress response. It's like, oh shit, now the bad thoughts are here, and I know those bad thoughts lead to this. So then it was like, okay, like it became a kind of practice where it was like, if I'm feeling any like stress or discomfort, it's like I'm resisting something. Like I would like stop and be like, what am I resisting? And then feel into it and be like, oh, there's a really uncomfortable sensation. Like my chest is getting really tight and like my breathing is getting short. Like, okay, let's go right there. And that's kind of what the practice became for me. Like probably one of the most impactful practices on my recovery journey was this, like, what am I resisting? And let's see if I can welcome that. And it took a lot of practice, like sitting with the discomfort, like meditation techniques to really learn to welcome that discomfort. But that's what really worked for me.
This is all incredibly insightful. Did you figure this out all on your own, or was there some place that you drew inspiration from? It's very impressive.
No, I learned a lot from like meditation teachers and like I guess you could call it like spiritual teachers, or that kind of subject. So I started with like meditation because it was calming the nervous system, and yeah, it just like if I was having symptoms and I would sit and meditate for 20 minutes, it would really work. So I started reading more about meditation, and yeah, that from there, that's where I started to get these insights of like how we're causing our own suffering with resistance and thoughts and that kind of thing. And then it really became like that. That's almost, I almost gave up on the recovery journey. Well, this is when I really embraced my situation. So this became more and more important to me. It was like, I can see how like all of the suffering, like besides the chronic illness, like before this, I wasn't very happy. You know, I had like social anxiety and, you know, like being a human, we've got all these issues, and I could see how this could all be addressed through like understanding the mind and looking inward. So like at this one point I was living on my own and I couldn't do anything. Like I didn't have any like close friendships at the time. So I was really on my own, and it was just like, well, I'm just going to sit and meditate. Like how can I use this time? Like, so yeah, I was just like, this is my life now. So like some of the meditation teachers would go on like retreats where they'd sit in a cave for like a month. I was like, well, I've got my cave here at home. Just do the same thing here, you know. So that's yeah, I kind of like embraced my situation, I suppose.
So is that the main thing that contributed to your recovery, or how would you sum up, you know, the biggest things that allowed you to finally fully recover?
Yeah, I would say what I just mentioned now was probably the biggest thing, because what happened is it became more important than the recovery, right? It was like, this is bigger than just dealing with these symptoms. It was like there's yeah, I can see like the insights that can be gained from this, and it almost like it felt like that's when I was really grateful for what was happening. I suddenly felt so lucky. I was like life gave me this. Like I would tell myself a lot of the time early on when I was struggling with long COVID, I was like, if only I could go back to how life was before I got COVID. You know, this ruined everything, and if I could just have that life back, everything would be perfect. But I was lying to myself, because like it didn't just start with COVID. It was like there was lots of stuff I was running from beforehand, and like emotional repression and like not being authentic in like friendships and relationships and all that kind of stuff. And this was like, this changed everything. It just gave me this opportunity to like look inward and learn all of this stuff. And yeah, so it became like really important. I was like, yeah, I'm so lucky that this happened. So yeah, it was like meditation and that kind of stuff was probably the biggest contributor, I suppose.
That's incredible. Right before I got sick, a week or two before, I remember just standing in my bathroom and looking in the mirror and looking at myself and thinking, I don't even think I like myself. Like, it was this scary, horrible realization. And, you know, what message is that sending to your nervous system, your body? But I had been just so disconnected and so on autopilot. And I'm like, how am I treating people? What are my priorities? How do I spend my time? Like, there were so many things in my life. Like, do I like my job? And then when this sickness came, as horrible and scary as it was, it caused everything to stop. And then I had nothing but time to think about, like, what is this career doing for me? How are my friendships? What purpose are they serving in my life? You know, how do I want to show up in the world? Do I have any personal integrity? Like, do I admire myself? Would I want to be my friend? So I think I get what you're saying. And a lot of people I hear say similar things. Not everybody, but it is a great opportunity. It can be such a gift. It's a horribly painful process to get there. But you come out on the other end in this whole other place with a whole new perspective on life and a whole new approach to it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree.
So it sounds like this experience has also changed you a lot. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So one more thing along the lines I was just saying of like what this gave me. Well, and it's funny. It's more what it took away from me that is what has been so helpful from this experience. Is it kind of like it took away all of these identities that I'd formed that were keeping me stuck, I suppose, or causing suffering in my life. And like I was eventually left, I remember like a year into the journey when all of these identities that I had were now gone. You know, it was like, okay, I was a sportsman, I was an active guy, I was doing my studies, I had a girlfriend. Then it was like in the middle of this when I had nothing left, I was like, who the hell am I? Like I remember distinctly like one day just thinking to myself, like who am I now? Like I don't even recognize myself. Like here I am, like stuck in a house, like unable to do anything. Like there's nothing left for me to claim. But then what happens is it's like the identity forms around the sickness, right? And that really kept me stuck for a while. It was like, okay, well, I'm this guy that's been sick for so long, and this is my identity now. And then when I got more into the spiritual meditation stuff, there was a lot of talk there about how it's all beliefs and identity that's causing all of your suffering. And then that's what helped me to overcome this as well. It was like I started to look at all the beliefs that I'd formed throughout this period of being sick that were now keeping me stuck, and this identity that had formed. And then it was a letting go. It was a massive letting go process. It was like, okay, I got to let go of that. So I'd let go of my old life. I'd formed this new sickness identity now, and then I had to let go of that. And it was just this constant letting go. And looking back, that's why this was actually such a beautiful, the way this played out in my life was just like, it's just life just like stripped me of all of these escapes and these identities until there was like only one way left to go. And it was so liberating, I suppose. So that's why I'm so grateful, I guess.
I've learned so much from you in this discussion, so I'm sure other people have as well. I think it's just incredible that you are, taking the time and the effort to share your journey with other people. I know that people will definitely appreciate it. So thank you so much for that, Kyle.
I'm so glad to hear it because, it was a massive part of my recovery as well was, other people speaking about it. And as you mentioned at the start of the interview, like changing the narrative about this illness and the beliefs about recovery is so important. So, that's why I'm really happy to do this because there's a lot of like misinformation out there about recovery. And, I think the more we speak about it, the more it will help people. So I'm really happy to do this.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Far too many people find themselves in a place feeling hopeless, and it's understandable with the information that's out there. And especially if you've been facing this for months or years or decades, it's easy to start to feel like this is it for me, and adopt that, illness as your identity and who you are. But for those of you watching, I've interviewed so many people, dozens and dozens of people who have felt that way and been told that they would never get better, and then fully did get their life back. So please, good for you for watching videos like this one. If you enjoyed this one, I was just thinking I'm going to link one up here from a guy named Roberto who also had long COVID and had a kind of somewhat similar journey to Kyle's here. Also very insightful. So thank you again to you, Kyle. Thanks to all of you who are watching. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope to see you in this next video.